Hey. Thank you.
We have a real fireside here.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. So my name is Lavine, and it gives me absolute honor and pleasure to have Ben here today. Our format for tonight is to have 45-minute, 50-minute conversation with this relatively charming fireside, and then open it up for 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Great to see such a great turnout. And before we get started in some of the questions, Ben, if you could just give us a little bit background on who you are and just quick 1 minute.
Great. Yeah. So I have a PhD in mathematics from the 1980s, a very long time ago. I've been doing AI in various forms for more than 30 years now, both research aimed at artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is a term I introduced in 2004 or 5, and then applied AI in all sorts of different vertical markets. And a couple of years ago, I co-founded a project called SingularityNET, which is a blockchain-based AI marketplace, sort of aimed at attempting to democratize the AI ecosystem, which is certainly a task still in the early stages, right? So I'm continuing to work on AGI R&D as well as growing SingularityNET and applying AI in medicine, finance, IoT, a bunch of areas.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. We're going to have so many things to talk about. So AI has been a term that's been around for many decades, but recently has really captured the media by a storm. We see a lot today with deep learning, a lot of these micro applications, and you coined artificial general intelligence. What are your thoughts on the roadmap of where we are today, deep learning applied in those fields like medicine, to the road ahead?
Yeah, as you know, the field of AI has been around a while, and I tend to trace it back to the 1930s with Norbert Wiener's book Cybernetics, where he was really looking at control and communication in biology systems and machine systems. And that was even a couple decades before the term AI was coined in the late 50s. So these ideas have been around a while, and there's been a lot of interesting algorithms and approaches, from neural nets to logic systems, evolutionary algorithms. In the last few years, there's been a tremendous explosion of enthusiasm for AI, partly because AI started doing practical things that ordinary people can see, right? Like it's not like AI wasn't being applied usefully before, but it wasn't being applied in products that people like visibly interact with every day, right? And so, but it is, as you say, it's micro applications. It's what I've called narrow AIs, which solve a highly specific problem in a well-defined context. And what we need to get to is AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is AI that can generalize and reason and transfer knowledge beyond its training and experience. And what's the best path to get from here to there is sort of subtle point, right? Like OpenAI got $1 billion for AGI R&D from Microsoft. They think they're going to get to human level AGI in perhaps 5 years, basically by taking existing AI ideas and just training them on huge amounts of data on a huge amount of Microsoft Azure servers, right? And I'm guessing it won't be quite that simple. So yeah, the question of the path from here to AGI is a subtle one. It could happen in a lot of ways, right? Like one route I'm very interested in, partly building on stuff I did with Hanson Robotics, where we made this Sophia robot and a bunch of other humanoid robots. I would love to make a robot toddler and just like get a little robot that can go to preschool and just teach it to do everything a 3-year-old kid can do in preschool, because that's sort of the crux of everyday common sense intelligence, right? Like by the time you get into kindergarten, you can combine movement, perception, social interaction, self and other, planning, almost everything, right? On the other hand, that's probably not going to be the whole story of how we get from here to AGI, just because it's not the most commercially lucrative thing, right? So I'm hoping I can pull together resources to do that project, but in parallel with that, there's going to be huge resources spent on applying AI in all sorts of application areas. So that's where I've been thinking about the idea of narrow AGI, which sounds like an oxymoron, but you think about a system that can generalize and abstract and transfer knowledge, sort of like a person, but it's especially good at doing that in one domain. So take like medical AI. Now in a hospital you might have 20 different AI algorithms doing different things. Like one is doing genomic analysis, one is analyzing like a patient database, one is maybe a customer service chatbot. What if you had one AI system that sort of could integrate all those functions? Then that's going to be making a lot of connections that aren't made now. Like right now you could have an AI analyzing DNA data from an Alzheimer's clinical trial, and you could have a patient with Alzheimer's, and there's an AI tracking his medication compliance.
So the two narrow.
But they're not even connected together. You don't have like a unified mind operating the hospital. So that would be like a narrow AGI that could generalize and reason, but was especially sort of focused on doing that in a hospital context. So yeah, we're going to see a robot toddler. Then we're going to see sort of narrow AGI type systems in various different vertical markets, and then they're all going to connect together behind the scenes, and that connection is what we're trying to do with SingularityNET.
Fantastic. How many of you know what artificial general intelligence is? If I get a raise of hands.
I don't know if I know what it is.
You did coin it, maybe.
It's easy to talk about things we don't understand. I mean, who invented the word consciousness? They probably don't know what it is.
Is his name Ben?
Yeah, no, well, it might have been, I don't know.
Coincidentally. So what is AGI to you, Ben?
Yeah, I think I introduced the term AGI out of desperation to find a title for a book, actually, because I was going to call the book Real AI, but I kind of figured that's insulting.
What sells better on the New York Times bestseller?
It didn't sell very well, so in that sense it may have been a poor choice. But Real AI, it seemed insulting because like narrow AI, it's not like it's fake or useless. It could save a lot of people's lives. It could be incredibly valuable, right? But it's still narrow AI doing one highly particular thing is different than what Mr. Data is doing in Star Trek, right? Or what humans are doing. Mm-hmm. And one thing that distinguishes us from these very narrow AI application programs is, I mean, we can deal with situations that, were not foreseen at the time we were trained or programmed or created. Like we can deal with the internet, right? Or simulated fire, right? And I mean that these things didn't exist when we went to school or when our brains were evolved or whatever. So this ability to generalize to fundamentally new situations, this is really what's needed to make AI programs that are not so restrictive in what they can do. Because you can never write out a set of rules to cover everything in a real world context, nor can you prepare a carefully curated training data set to cover what's going to happen in a real world context. You need a system that can just like think on its feet, right? Whether or not it has physical feet, but it can like adapt to whatever is coming. A subtle point is full general intelligence and the ability to transfer and adapt to any possible thing. That's probably not possible for any finite physical system, right? So, I mean, there's some information theory limits there. So what we're just talking about is ramping up the level of generality significantly beyond what we have in current narrow AI. So humans, I'm sure, are not the most generally intelligent possible systems, but we're way better at generalization and adaptation than current AI programs.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned something along the lines of 5 years from now, there's an expectation of combining at least some form of AGI with those narrow applications. What are your thoughts on sort of the expectation, right? Some people say it's 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, and then not just the expectation, but the delta of when we expect something and when it actually does become a reality for them.
So my first thought is, having been at this a long time, it's amazing to me that so much of the debate about is it 5, 10, 20, 30, or 40 years, because when I organized the first annual conference on AGI in 2006, I would say almost all people believed AGI would never happen, and even most AI professors believed it was 500, 1,000, 10,000 years away.
Delta is huge then.
Yeah, so the fact that so many people are now willing to think, yeah, maybe it'll happen in 5 or maybe 30 years is very interesting to me, because to my mind, we don't actually have substantially more directly relevant evidence than we did 20 years ago. I mean, I've always believed, since I first learned anything about AI in the 1970s, I've always believed that with a concerted effort, one could build a thinking machine in 5 to 10 years with a reasonable amount of processors. But what's convinced the masses of the world that AGI is plausible, it's like Facebook labeling your face, it's self-driving car driving around in Palo Alto. It's these things that, from a certain standpoint, are not really evidence of a system with autonomy and the ability to generalize and self-control. But I guess they've been evocative to people, right? Which obviously is worth a lot. So I think whether we get human level AGI in 5 or 50 years is completely irrelevant in the scope of human history, right? That's like was writing invented 10,000 or 10,030 years ago? I guess.
It's a needle prick.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter. Of course, it matters to us and our careers and our lives, because it might determine whether we live or die if the AGI invents an immortality pill or something.
Well, you lead me to a really good segue to our next area of discussion. So you've been really fascinated, as a lot of people are in today's world, with where AI can help extend human life. Whether it's CRISPR or genome sequencing. Yeah. So where do you kind of see that panning out, right? The applications of AI to help us better gene sequence and understand what makes longer lives, healthier lives? Yeah, so that does tie in with the previous question, right? Because I think we could get in 5 years to human level AGI. The question is if humanity focuses its attention that way, right? Like when humanity really wants to do something, you make a Manhattan Project, or if man to space.
Yeah, if a war happens, suddenly everyone single focuses on that, right? And building a benevolent general intelligence is not getting remotely that level of focus, although it's getting more focus than it was in the past. And the same is true of human life extension and super longevity, to use a sort of nicer term than immortality, I guess. This is something that I think we could make extremely rapid progress on if humanity chose to prioritize it, but we don't. And that's actually perplexing to me, because I can sort of see why humanity would choose not to prioritize AGI, even though it has potential to do a lot of good, because people are also spooked by AGI in various ways. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, not getting old and dying, it just seems like a no-brainer. Like, now that it's clear that science can enable this, why aren't we putting more of our resources into it? Which is, in 1965, my father led a student protest on Antioch University campus for a group called SLAM, Student League Against Mortality. So they were protesting death like a year before I was born.
Interesting time.
Yeah, the idea of beating death is obviously not new, and I guess the Chinese had the Taoist immortality potions a long time ago. But now with CRISPR, as you mentioned, but also a host of other technologies, like say, engineered molecular scissors for cutting cross-linked glucosapane molecules in extracellular matrix, or their, say, protofection for inserting enzymes into the cell to fix mitochondrial DNA. There's an endless series of interesting technologies. So then why isn't humanity spending like 1% of the global world product on beating death, right? It's quite interesting.
What do you think? Why?
Well, that's a sociology question, right? So I guess the first point to make is, I think we have tremendous progress on genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, understanding various levels of the organism. There's a couple things that aren't happening now that should be happening. One is there's no massive scale data integration. Like, data is siloed largely inside companies and inside hospitals. Even the data that's online, like on the NIH's website in the US, it's in very badly preprocessed form, and it's a pain in the ass to figure out what it's doing. So humanity has not decided to make like a big, clean, cross-linked database of health. Like, there's no Bloomberg of health, right? I mean, what the amount of care we've put into financial data is insanely more than we've put into data of human health and life, even though we're all going to get sick and die, and we should care about that. The other thing is, partly because of that, so of course we're not applying machine learning across the totality of data about human bodies. Systems biology, which is making like simulation models of the whole organism, also it's a teeny little bit of the field, which again it's partly because cross-disciplinary thinking is not the way academia or industry is organized. Like, many biologists focus on one gene or one pathway for their whole career, right? But a lot of what happens in the body can't be understood on that level. So it's, I guess, due to people either trying to maximize profit for their company or maximize promotion speed and number of publications as an academic, people focus on
narrow applications.
Yeah, little tiny things, even though in the end they realize, as the Chinese medicine realized, right, it's really the body is a holistic system and should be studied that way. AI will study it that way almost automatically because it doesn't bring sort of the biases and the goals that people have. But the AI, at the moment, the AI can't like integrate and normalize all that data. It can only analyze data that's been prepared for it. So yeah, I think we're in the interesting position now that some of the people in this room will probably never die due to being young enough to get the immortality potion. And
it all depends on your age tonight.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm marginal at best, right? So, I mean, I'm over 50, so we'll have to. We may get there in the next 20, 30 years.
Time is ticking.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's guaranteed. Right?
Absolutely. So you talked about, just right before we move on, you talked about the need for maybe finding a middle ground before we go to this huge grand vision of AGI and singularity. Maybe finding that sort of micro step ahead of us is the narrow AGI. Do you think that is something that could help specifically around human longevity? If we were able to centralize the data, that we'd be able to connect at least 1, 2, or 3 areas of narrow application and create sort of generalized intelligence?
I wouldn't phrase it as centralizing the data. What we're doing is integrating the data, and much of what we're doing with SingularityNET is integrating diverse AI agents and data processes, but in a decentralized way, without any central controller. And blockchain is an important tool for that. So yeah, I think certainly to the extent that we can show that the more of this data integration you do, combined with AI processing, the more value is delivered. I mean, showing that step by step is what will cause more data to be integrated and more AI and system biology modeling to be done. So I mean, given the way human society and economy works, it sort of has to be done. It almost has to be done step by step. Occasionally, you have some crazy thing like like Henry Markram and the Human Brain Project. They just got $2 billion for systems neuroscience just by edict of the European Union, right? But that's rare, and it's not even enough, right? Like, that $2 billion is still a drop in the bucket of global medical research. So yeah, I think going step by step in a certain way is sort of how it how it has to happen. But still, if you have the right sort of vision governing that step-to-step work, it can happen. It can happen better.
So it's a great entry point into discussing how you see blockchain and decentralization technologies converge with the need for AI. So tell us a little bit about Singularity and how you see those two technologies, specifically with the vision of Singularity.
I think, so blockchain, it's a very cool technology. I mean, if you have a math or distributed systems background, I think it is not as fundamental a technology as AI is, because I think AI, I mean, making creatures smarter and more powerful than us is, I mean, that's the biggest thing in human history, and in a sense it ends human history and begins a new chapter, right? But blockchain is an important part of the plumbing, in the same way that the internet is an important part of the plumbing of all the systems we're building. And what blockchain contributes is it lets you build sort of complex, distributed computational systems that don't have a central controller, and different parts of the system will be owned by different parties who don't trust each other, right? And that's highly relevant on Earth right now, since, I mean, the planet is owned by different parties who don't trust each other, right? So, and having that solved by having one central guy who everybody trusts, I mean, this has many known failure modes, right?
It can happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you can have, for example, all the members in a supply chain just coordinate the activity along that supply chain without any central authority, that's cleaner, right? There's no one person who's in the power position and can screw with everyone else. It's just everyone in the chain sees the relevant things everyone else in the chain is doing, and then to make a change, you need everyone to buy into that change. It happens on the software level. So in the same way for AI, if you look at AI functionality being delivered to a business or a government agency, whatever, by a bunch of different AIs that are cooperating together with each other, and then the same AI may serve different functions in different markets, or it may serve a support function for other AIs. You then have a sort of society of minds, as the AI pioneer Marvin Minsky called it. And then you have the question, like, who controls this society of minds? Like, is it, well, like Google or Amazon, who own the cloud that it's running on? Or, I mean, is it the government that made you apply for a license to put an AI into the cloud? Well, the internet doesn't work that way, right? The internet, just anyone puts a server online and announces it's there. The internet is fundamentally decentralized. And so a bunch of us working on AGI together, we're thinking AI should be that way also, right? And then blockchain gives tools to do that, to create a population of AIs that can coordinate together but are fundamentally decentralized and just controlled by collective governance of the AIs in the network. So SingularityNET, it realizes that, and I mean the practical commercial form of it is it's an API marketplace for AIs. So anyone can put an AI into it. It advertises what it can do. Anyone who needs an AI service puts a request in.
Completely decentralizing it.
Yeah. And the request is processed in a decentralized way. More like BitTorrent than iTunes, except we're not focused on pirating stuff. Right?
So you're creating the BitTorrent of AI.
Yeah, we're not using that slogan for some.
Let's not create that slogan. Yeah. iTunes of AI.
Yeah, but iTunes is centralized though, right? So that's it's peer-to-peer in the sense that BitTorrent is, but BitTorrent, the thing is, I mean, it could be used for all sorts of things. In practice, it's largely used for evading copyright, right? So, BitTorrent, that was now bought by Tron, right? Which is a blockchain project, which some people have issues with. But the concept there is an interesting one, which is if you have this peer-to-peer like music sharing system, Now, if you had a token associated with it, then perhaps it could be based not on copyright fraud, but like you have a band, you put some music out there, and the people who listen to it will like click to give you some tokens, right? Absolutely. Now, how that will work out with Tron and BitTorrent is a different question, but from AI, we're building it from the ground up, right? So and that's important because in BitTorrent, you're just sending music files around and playing them, and none of that takes so much resources. But for AI, a lot of compute resources are needed to run the AIs, which means, I mean, it can't be all free. People have to be paying for that.
Contributing some of the computing power.
Right. So, I mean, ultimately, as a marketplace, it's B2B marketplace, right? So, I mean, AI developers, could be individuals or companies, are putting AI services in there. And it's mostly companies who need AI API calls in the back end of their products or their websites or services. They would make API calls into this decentralized network instead of like Google Cloud API or Amazon API. And getting that to be the case, we still have a lot of work to do, right? Like the infrastructure is there now, but it's not yet as slick and easy to use as Google or Amazon's APIs, and there's not yet as much stuff on there, right? So there's certainly a long way to go for business development and UX and a whole bunch of other things to get a substantial part of the world's AI utilization to be on a decentralized network. But Linux gives us a bit of hope, right? Because that's, I mean, I remember when GCC came out and Linux first came out, nobody believed open source was going to be powerful.
Proved them all wrong.
Yeah, because people said, well, wait, everyone needs to get paid to work, so open source will never take off because people aren't being paid for it.
So how do you overcome that sort of necessity for them to contribute some power with the benefit of whatever application it is they choose to pull out, right? It's kind of like a vault. You have to give and take.
Well, I mean, in SingularityNET, the basic model is pretty simple. I mean, you have vendors who are selling AI services and customers who are paying for it. So, I mean, there's money being injected, which pays for the resources. I think in the medium term, we're going to partner with various hosting providers who have their own data centers. And then, I mean, you can customize server farms for AI processing, and you can substantially, I mean, offering hosting is going to be commoditized, right? So, you can undercut the large providers significantly. They're making a huge profit now, right? But it can't be that way forever. But there's also a lot of more creative options. Like depending on what kind of AI algorithm you're using, I mean, there's some that could run effectively like on a network of 100,000 mobile phones or something, so that you could use mechanisms like they do in protein folding at home or SETI at home or something to harness a whole bunch of just ambient processing power. Eventually, you can get a brain plug-in, and like when you're just playing a video game or doing something that doesn't use most of your brain, then you can sell the rest of your brain's processing power to the AI network. Right? We haven't rolled that out yet, though. That's 2.0 version.
Yeah, you buy those at a 7-Eleven near you.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, on the topic of consciousness and the topic of AI in the brain, there's a lot of various opinions, and everyone is free to have their own opinion. But where do you see the convergence when it comes to the states of consciousness of how AI is going to either converge within our brains or diverge within our brains?
I mean, an AGI system, unless it has a very human-like body, is going to have very different types of consciousness than people has. It doesn't necessarily mean it'll be less or more conscious, but it's a different sort of mind, right? Because so much of our consciousness is just out of our body feelings. The body feeling of an AI with sensors and actuators all over the world, but not with all these little like bacteria and living cells inside. It's just going to be a whole different feeling to be that AI. We probably can't relate to what states of consciousness it will have. On the other hand, cyborgizing ourselves and like plugging an AGI into the brain can be quite interesting, and that will be a new thing to explore, right? Because if you think about it, if the AI was 1,000,000 times smarter than you and you plug it into your brain,
you become 1,000,000 times smarter.
Well, but it's not you, right?
It's part of you.
The human part is 1/1,000,000th of the system, so it becomes almost irrelevant. It's like you have 1,000,000 neurons in your gut, and like 100 billion in your brain. So the ones in your gut, they do something, but they're kind of overshadowed, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if maintaining your integrity as a human is just an important value, then you can limit the degree of communication with the AI part of the cyborg you, then you're limiting your intelligence also. So you'll have a world where some people open their minds totally to the global AI, and then they're no longer humans in any traditional sense. They're just like interfaces to some bigger mind. Or some people throttle that connection so they can remain human, because that's important to them.
Do you think that will distort our sense of reality?
Mine's already pretty distorted. I think it'll be all right. You I don't know about. Yeah. Of course, that will completely change our sense of. It'll change our sense of self, right? If you can merge your mind, like also we'll have like Wi-Fi telepathy once you have brain-computer interface. You can share
next
thoughts.
time we do one of these, we don't have to have mics and.
Yeah, you can. There will be some issues because many of each of our thoughts will just be incomprehensible to other people. But what's in
this whole thing could be done.
What's in the common mind space, you could just beam the thoughts to people, right? So yeah, of course, the whole notion of like self and will and a whole bunch of the things we take for granted won't be the same as they are now. If you could copy what's in the brain and make a duplicate version of you, which one is really you? Well, they both are. It's just a whole different way of thinking, right?
And how do we program that so that it's benevolent and it does for the collective?
No, you can attempt to teach compassion and benevolence. I don't think you literally can program it. There are many counter examples to that, like in Asimov had the 3 laws of robotics, which were designed to fail, right? Because the world always finds a way to work around your rules, and it's just like, that's why lawyers exist, right? If you make a legal code, there's always some way to work around it that obeys the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law, right? So,
are there any lawyers in the audience?
3 over there.
Yeah.
2 over there. Hello.
Yeah. No, so you can't really lay it out programmatically in any compact way, but I guess if you interact with AIs in everyday life and they're just learning by example and by joint, like shared action in common situations with you, certainly the AIs can pick up much of human values and culture in that way, but where they will take it from there, we don't know. The first thing I thought when you asked about will it change our consciousness or sense of self or whatever, is like what was human consciousness and sense of self like, say, 5,000 years ago, or in the Middle Ages or something? It's probably very, very different than now. Certainly human values were different, right? Because, in 100, 150 years ago, like in the US, if you're openly gay, you'll probably be beaten to death, which will happen in many African countries right now. Yet now we have legal gay marriage all over, right?
Things are in fashion, and sometimes they leave in fashion.
Well, and I think human values do evolve in a certain direction, right? Like we are, as culture globalizes, on the whole, things are evolving in the direction of more sort of inclusive compassion and more acceptance of, ways of thinking or living that are different than ourselves. That's certainly a direction, anyway. So that may extend considerably once you have all different sorts of, like, people with wings, people with 3 heads, and group minds, or people living in virtual world instead of a physical body. Then I guess the tendency toward inclusion and sort of acceptance of things that are different will have to become even more than it is now. But what that means is, how can you ask the AI to like freeze itself at the values of 2020 or something? Because what if the AI were frozen at the values of 1950? We would now hate that AI, right? We wouldn't want it to.
But then why freeze it at all?
Because otherwise, how do you control where it evolves to, right? I mean, it won't be frozen. The AI will be adapting and learning, and it will be learning in a messy way from many different groups of humans with different and conflicting value systems, right? And then because China is building powerful AIs, Putin is interested in AGI now specifically. Trump probably doesn't know what it is. But
This is the part where we talk politics.
yeah, well, but the U.S. is still leading the world in AI even so. I mean, U.S. things are not as government driven as in Russia or China, right? So the point is, you're going to have early stage AGIs popping up in many different places. With
Government induced rather than enterprise induced.
It's a mix, right? I mean, in China, obviously, most of the AI activity is in companies, but the companies work very closely with government. But I mean, if you search on Google for Google NSA, you will find a lot of interesting things, right? So I mean, even in U.S., there's plenty of cooperation of big companies and government. So I think, yeah, that's part of the motivation for something like SingularityNET is, if the world is left to its own devices, I mean, it's a dozen companies cooperating with a few big governments that are going to build the first AGIs, and already these are hiring almost all AI PhDs and doing most of the advanced AI research, right? So that, and these entities will exist, and they're certainly not all bad, but just like with the example of Linux and operating systems, it'd be nice if some centralized and more open modality, like we're playing a significant role in that ecosystem.
So we talked about compassion. We talked about a lot of things really. Where do you think creativity will stand when you start to see the advancements we're seeing in narrow and general artificial intelligence?
Yeah, right now, I would say AIs can't be creative in the same sense that some people can, but it will get there. Like in music, for example, if you fed a deep neural net a bunch of, say, progressive jazz saxophone solos, I mean, if you fiddle with it a bit, it's going to be able to make a saxophone solo probably better than most of what you'd hear in a random jazz club. On the other hand, you're never going to, using current AI methods, an AI is never going to do like what John Coltrane did and invent just completely new ways of playing and new ways of composing or something. You're not going to get an AI Jimi Hendrix that just figures out like, well, if I turn the amp way up, it'll resonate with the body of the guitar, I get this feedback, and then I can take it this direction, right? So there's a certain type of creativity that does seem tied to general intelligence, and it involves like really stepping out from what was done before and integrating information from a much broader context, right? It's not like these creative ideas come from nowhere or like unique divine inspiration, but they come from the broader context of life in the world beyond the particular task that's being looked at, right? And that so there's I guess most of what humans do that's creative in the economy now, like say graphic design or making new pop songs or something.
Virtual reality.
Yeah, designing new video games in a well-defined genre. Most of these creative things can probably be done by AIs even short of general intelligence. But then to make a big creative leap and like invent a totally new genre of video game or a new type of music or something, then that will wait for general intelligence. But once you get to human level general intelligence, it's clear an AI will be able to be far more creative than humans. I mean, if for no other reason than like if you're an AI painter or philosopher or something, you could make 1 million copies of yourself and let each of them just go crazy in a different direction, and then take the ones that produce the best works and then just shut off the rest, right? I mean, as a human artist, I mean, you can't make an evolving ensemble of yourself, right? So yeah, I think how much that will matter to people and in what sense is a different problem. But that gets into like, why do you create? Like if you, I mean, I play the piano a lot, but I'm not remotely the best in the world at it. And I compose music, even though they're probably not my favorite songs in all history, right? So, I mean, we can create things just because we like to do it.
Yeah.
And we enjoy, like, looking at our kids' finger paintings or playing music in a band with other people just for the process, right? Even if it's not the best thing ever. So the AGIs may be able to compose better music than us, but we still like to listen to each other's songs just because we like each other, right? And that, hopefully that will be the direction that things go, rather than people just saying, well, I give up, AI is better at everything than I am, right?
Well, on that note, I'd like to bring us to our final question, and then please, audience, prepare some questions for us. So the world is changing really fast. AI is going to, as you mentioned, automate a lot of what we call work. You know, education systems are going to have to change. We're going to have to think very differently about the world that our children and their children are going to have to live in. So where do you think, from a sort of purpose and like the reason to want to have education and knowledge, where do you think we'll be in 10 years, right? How, as the world loses millions of jobs, how do you think the workforce of the future is going to evolve?
So you're mixing up purpose with work in an interesting way.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean...
We derive a lot of purpose from our work.
Some people do, yeah. I mean, I do personally, but I know a lot of people who don't also, who just work to put money in the bank, and then their purpose in their mind is doing something quite different, right? So
how do you see the interrelationship between purpose
first
and
of
work?
all, I think there's going to be a complex and gradual transition, right? And we can see that in a very practical sense. So like with SingularityNET, we have a spin-off, Singularity Studio, that's building enterprise software products that like back end on the decentralized network. And companies that want to buy these products, I mean, they have a couple motivations. Sometimes they can do their business just better than they could otherwise because they have AI. Sometimes it's just the AI does what people were doing otherwise. So we're, by providing AI products, we're letting businesses make more money and provide better services, but we're also letting them fire a bunch of people, right? And of course they're needing to hire new programmers or system integrators or something who can understand the AI software that we're supplying them with, but that's always fewer people, right? So it's going to continue that way for a while. There'll be better and better jobs for fewer and fewer people with special skills, which aren't only going to be technical skills, right? Like the skill to bridge the technical and human world is equally important. But then people who don't have those special skills will be either unemployed or marginalized. Like a good friend of mine, they started a company aiming at building AGI like 3 years ago. Instead, what they did, they ended up automating the speech interaction for the McDonald's drive-thru, and they sold their company to McDonald's. So this will, within a few years, eliminate all those people.
I guess you could call that a pivot.
Yeah, it's a pivot, and they made a lot of money, and now they can use it. Now their company is McDonald's AI Labs. So either McDonald's will build like the AGI Ronald McDonald, or they'll leave eventually and use their wealth to build AGI privately or something, right? But anyway, all those people who work in McDonald's, like inside that drive-through desk, just saying, yeah, like, what do you want? Do you want 3 burgers and 2 fries? I mean, all those people will be out of work before long because, I mean, this apprentice system it can hold those dialogues just as well as a person. They're pretty limited domain dialogues.
And what happens to those people, though? I mean, we're not just talking about McDonald's. We're talking about people who drive cars. We're talking about,
I mean, hopefully they don't become the hamburgers, right?
Do you see them acquiring skills? Do you see them just painting all day? Do you like? There's millions.
So,
it's not thousands, of millions of jobs.
The end game is pretty clear. What it should be if we're not going to have another disaster, right? I mean, the end game has to be some form of universal basic income, as my friend Andrew Yang is promoting in the U.S. election with more success than most people thought he would have.
Do you think he knows what AGI is?
Of course he does. Yeah. No, I mean we met in his campaign office in New York when he was just getting started. So, I mean he's not that highly technical, but he has a lot of quite deep and interesting transhumanist ideas. But he's just like he's trying to harp on one simple thing and get it into the mass mind, and is succeeding at that reasonably well.
Universal basic needs.
Yeah, and I think clearly once all the production is being done by like a vast integrated automated infrastructure, I mean, what are the choices, right? Either everyone is left to die, or they are supplied with the goods and services that they need to live a reasonable life. So, and I think after a bunch of annoying ups and downs, then that's what will happen. What worries me more is like Congo or Azerbaijan or various places which are likely to be slower in adopting these advanced technologies. Like, who gives UBI to people in say southern Chad in Africa or something, right? I mean, I sort of think in the developed world, after a bunch of annoying politics and BS, in the end, the developed world is not going to let vast masses of its population like starve in the street or die of curable diseases or something. I mean, so I think some form of basic income is going to happen. I mean, I think it will happen eventually in the developing world also, but the transition is less obvious, right? Because I don't think U.S., China, or Western Europe is going to be immediately giving basic income to everyone in Africa or Central Asia. Now, you could have a situation where, I mean, in Africa there's a lot of subsistence farmers, right? And that will keep generating food. So you could have a situation where in the rich part of the world, there's like robot infrastructure for everything, and 80% of people are on basic income and just playing virtual reality games or learning to play new instruments, socializing, learning. And then in Africa, 80% of people are just subsistence farming, like in the old days, because there's no way for their labor to get them value in the world economy. But then you will have some very interesting disaster scenarios, because some of the kids of these subsistence farmers will learn to hack, right? And they will be very annoyed at the world order, and they will hack into the power grid in the developed world and
into our brains.
Oh, yeah, potentially, right? So I mean, yeah. So there, I think, yeah, if global inequality is not sort of palliated and calmed down to a reasonable degree relative to the rate of progress of technology, I mean, there's a lot of sort of nasty World War III scenarios you could imagine, right?
Very delicate human capital.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's extremely likely humanity will completely extinct itself in this process, and of course it's possible, but a lot of very unpleasant things could happen, and I think we have SingularityNET. We have offices here in Beijing, in Brazil, in Russia, in St. Petersburg, in Novosibirsk, and in Bangalore, and in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. So just interacting with our own staff, you see how these things are going in a lot of parts of the world. And in Addis Ababa, young programmers there are basically exactly the same culture and mindset as young programmers in every other city. But if you go out of the city, it's a completely different world. And there's going to be a big generational as well as class divide, right? So you're talking about meaning and purpose. Like, most people I know, like 25 years or younger, they'll be very happy if they never have to work for a living. Right? They don't have to figure out what job they're going to do, and then they can just do more interesting things. And they're not deriving the sense of meaning and purpose in life from whatever job they're doing in most cases. Most people my own age, if they're successful professionals, I hear very many people say, well, what if we don't have to work, we'll just be useless. What will we do with our time? Right? So you have to think, after the basic income problem is solved, and assuming that gets solved globally in some way that doesn't cause World War III, then what will happen is the younger people who grew up with robots and AGIs and basic income will probably have very happy lives, and they'll be just unable to imagine how shitty it was to have to work for a living all the time instead of just doing what you feel like every day, right? But the older people who, just like we can't really imagine what it was like to have to hunt and gather for your food all the time, right? And to not have reading and writing, right?
Completely different states of consciousness.
Yeah, but older people who did derive meaning from whatever they were doing before the singularity, right, may have a significant problem adjusting. On the other hand, if you have a significant problem adjusting, you can always go to the 7-Eleven and get the total adjustment brain plug-in, right?
So, $9.99.
Yeah, or we can provide it for free, right?
Okay.
So it's a bit like in the U.S., there's a lot of homeless people who prefer to be in the street than in whatever facilities society will provide them for their own reasons. And you might find something like that, like people are miserable and feel no purpose, but they, for their own psychological reason, they prefer that, even though there's an alternative available. And so that comes down to the ethics of the AGI, right? Does it consider it more ethical to forcibly repair the brains of those people so they stop worrying and love the AGI, or does it consider it more ethical to let them continue to be like willfully depressed, right?
Absolutely. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. Please give me a round of applause. I think we have time for 2 questions. Anyone here? Please.
Quick question, Ben. Great talk. Are you able to talk about GPT-2 and provide any insights into the initial release, announcement and withholding, and then checking out? Because, the reason I ask is because a lot of people are very scared of AI and AI applications, and this provides a good case study on how to release or maybe not release.
Well, I think it provides a good case study of how to secure large amounts of funding for your project. Right? I mean, clearly. So in the recent development of deep neural networks, there's been a few significant advances. Not too many, but because deep neural nets have been around since the 60s. But there was GANs, generative associative networks. We have a discriminated network and a generating network, and they sort of compete with each other. Then there's the transformer network model, which is a certain type of neural network that deals with sort of predictive time series, transforming the past into the future of the time series. And transformer neural networks, they were really developed simultaneously by a bunch of different people, and they've been very good at language modeling and generating language. And really, GPT-2 was just, to my mind, it was one in a series of transformer neural net models for generating language. For a month or two, it was the best one out there, and then a couple months later, there was a better one, and a couple months before, there was a better one. Because, we have, in SingularityNET platform, we have some transformer neural nets, and we use them for the Philip K. Dick robot, but we didn't actually use GPT-2 because there's better transformer neural net models out there by now, right? So I think the OpenAI's marketing division managed to convince the world that GPT-2 was a huge breakthrough in language generation. But actually, it's really just one in a series of transformer neural net models, which is, with any of these things, like with face recognition, someone got 97% accuracy, then someone had 97.2, then someone had 97.4, and now we have 99.8% accuracy. So, I mean, each of those steps is an innovation, but theirs wasn't actually a better innovation than all the other steps. But they had brilliant marketing by saying, this is so dangerous, we won't release it. And then shortly after that, they got $1 billion from Microsoft. So that, I think, as a business case study, it's very interesting of like how to exploit people's deep-seated fears of AI to secure large sums of money. Right? I mean, I haven't drawn any practical lessons from that personally so far, but it's kind of. Boston Dynamics did that in a different way, right? They released these ominous-looking killer robot videos, and then even though they haven't had actually a viable business model ever, they keep getting bought for huge amounts of money. So I mean, like fear, uncertainty, and doubt is very profitable. I think, now that that's been released, everyone can play with it and see like it's really, really cool. As our other transformer neural net models, B, like, it's not an existential threat to human civilization. You could use transformer neural net models to generate a huge amount of fake tweets or something. On the other hand, sort of, so what? Like you can also pay a lot of guys in Russia to generate a lot of fake tweets, and I mean, the rate limiting factor there isn't the number of fake tweets you can generate, right? It's more the arms race against the social media companies, like blocking the fake tweets. I think as a natural language processing researcher, I found all these transformer and network models very interesting because they have absolutely no cognitive understanding of what they're talking about, but they can look so compelling in a few sentences or paragraphs. It's kind of cool. I don't think it's quite the right direction for making a system that can really understand what's going on, but it's amazing how well you can do by just faking it, right? Which is funny. And I guess in the end, I think you need to train your AI on language and the thing that the language is about. So language used in video would be an interesting start. And I mean, if you could train a language model on all the video that YouTube has, right? And you're looking at the verbiage and then why it was said and what was happening, that's going to lead to something more interesting, right? Because then it's getting sort of the grounding of the language, which is in a better sense the meaning of the language, and there's work on that too, which is probably more of a threat to destroy the world, although also more potential to do good.
I think we have time for one more. Andy?
Not quite sure how to put this, but you at one point talked about you talked about marginalisation of the society that is getting removed by AI, but then you said more, I've forgotten the word you used, but integration of societies, and the two feel like they're completely separate. And I love your vision about it becoming more integrated and harmonious, but it in fact feels like the opposite's happening.
There's a lot of contradictory things happening in human society at any one time, right? I mean, I see that if you look in Africa or the US, like the young tech geeks in Addis Ababa, where I spend a bunch of time, they're sort of part of the same culture and society as the programmers here or in New York or Europe or something. So that's a lot of integration that wasn't happening before, right? A lot of globalization. then the gap between those programmers and their grandparents who are being subsistence farmers is getting wider and wider and wider, right? So that's, on the one hand, a lot of barriers are being broken down. On the other hand, some people are like jumping on the train that's accelerating really fast, and others are standing behind in the station, right? And that's a really challenging problem.
Inclusive is the word.
So
inclusive and marginalisation are almost completely separate.
So I think
I love the idea of the inclusive society.
I think that the values of the tech world are, in principle, are inclusive.
Also Silicon Valley particularly, but in fact,
even
Trump and everything else.
I mean, if you look in Ethiopia, which I keep coming back to because it's sort of the concrete example of the developing world. I mean, the tech geeks in Addis are not the ones who will like beat someone up for being openly gay, right? But whereas there are many people in Ethiopia who will. So I think just being in partly, I mean, they came here, they met like gay programmers who worked for SingularityNET, right? So just being involved in the more global ecosystem sort of opens you up more. But on the other hand, that doesn't necessarily make the other people who are being sort of left behind by the tech economy, it doesn't necessarily make them have a more inclusive mindset, right? And what's happening in Ethiopia now, like Abiy was elected prime minister. He has a degree in software engineering. He understands AI. He did all great things. I mean, he ended the war of Ethiopia and Eritrea. And he let all the political prisoners out of prison, let all the exiles back in the country. Now, what you have, like open tribal warfare between different tribes who are trying to like take over their part of the country, right? Which is a very, very short-sighted mode of thinking. And these people are they're trapped in the tribal war they were having 20 years ago when they were exiled or something, right? So that's, how we solve that is hard. I think here's one last point though. I think one of the most valuable AI applications that's going to come out, and I expect this in the next 5 years, is speech-to-speech machine translation for languages that don't have a lot of like training corpus. They don't have a lot of writing, and you don't have a whole big parallel corpus of a sentence in this language and a sentence in English or something. If you could do speech-to-speech translation based on minimal supervised data, just from a bunch of recordings in that language, I mean, then you could, everyone in Africa has a feature phone now, even though not everyone has a smartphone, right? Then you could make a system where anyone in the world could pick up their phone and talk to anyone else in the world. And anyone in the world could pick up the phone in their own native language, and they could ask questions of AI question answering systems or with all different perspectives, right? So that's a case where AI could open up channels of communication in a very interesting way.
Can we squeeze one last one from this side?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This side, anyone? Enrique.
But probably already many people ask you this, but how far you think we are from quantum computing, and how will this impact AI and also blockchain? And maybe another small one is, what are your views for 2020 in terms of AI, the biggest trends for 2020?
Well, so regarding quantum computing, I mean, for blockchain, that's sort of easy. Like, eventually, quantum computing will crack current crypto, and you'll have to use quantum encryption for everything, and that will be an expensive transition. But it's exactly what is the timing, we don't know, right? I mean, it's not 50 years, but it's not 2 years either. So, I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow. And in a system like SingularityNET, I mean, we isolate the blockchain and certain software objects and the crypto and certain smaller ones. So, I mean, for applications that are built using reasonable software engineering principles, like swapping out a quantum computing layer for the encryption is not a huge deal. I mean, you'll probably have that's like the Y2K problem, right? I mean, you probably have some badly built systems that have to be totally rebuilt because they didn't isolate the encryption in their code. For AI, it's more interesting. I mean, I think right now quantum computers don't really do anything useful, in spite of press releases to the contrary. But in let's say 5 to 10 years, I'm sure they will, right? And so that whether it'll be a general purpose quantum Turing machine, I don't know, but at least there'll be like a few different QPUs plugged into your server, like we have GPUs now, that can do certain types of inference or analysis insanely faster than any other processing unit. And yeah, I think AI can exploit that in a lot of different ways. We're just sort of waiting on the hardware the quantum hardware to get scalable enough. Like I thought a lot about, we have a probabilistic logic engine in OpenCog, but you could replace that with like an amplitude logic engine, which is like a quantum probability logic engine that then does reasoning in all the parallel universes at once, right? And so there's some types of logical inference you could do in tremendously, basically exponentially faster on average using a quantum computer, but we don't have that quantum computer right now. So yeah, clearly the impact will be revolutionary. It'll probably start like it started with GPUs, where you have an overall software system that's classical, and then certain functions are just sped up really fast by the quantum computer, and then maybe eventually all the AGI will run on the quantum Turing machine, but that'll be a few steps down.
And with that, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
All right.